referred to sort of some paid for, it was trying to exclude or really push the parties not to use commercial products that might somehow be utilized to shift the burden to Medicare. But I guess the more concerning part for myself, and I think our members, or at least some of our members, is that because of the guidelines, they exclude a fairly large number of potential settlements from CMS review. What would you recommend, or what do you think we should do in those cases? Because basically anything we put in there, they're now saying we can just say we don't think this is enough. And do you have faith that they actually will look and discern whether it's appropriate or not, or will they wholesale just say you didn't use our review guidelines, we're going to consider the whole thing to be the whole settlement to be the amount of the MSA?
That's awesome. Yeah, that's a great question. It's a big part of. I mean, I'll to be frank and tell you that I can speculate, but I'm not 100% on the answer to that. And I actually have a meeting with CMS in about 2 weeks to discuss it. But I will tell you how I've interpreted what I believe CMS's intent was. So 2 categories of cases. So if you go back to this little handy dandy slide and see settlements that are greater than $25,000 with Medicare beneficiaries. So in $250,000 with reasonable expectation. So there are whole swaths of settlements lower than that, right? Those settlements that are lower than that, I don't believe are covered by this new policy. And the reason why is because Medicare left unchanged a separate part of the reference guide that specifically listed 2 types, two examples. One of a beneficiary settling for $17,000. And one of a non-beneficiary, but soon will be settling for $225,000. In both cases, they left the policy exactly as it had previously been written. And basically they said, if the parties don't have, on the one that was much larger, they said, if the parties don't have a, quote, plan for future care, then they place the entire settlement at risk. So I think that those cases that are not eligible for review, as long as if future medical is incorporated, you have a, quote, plan for future care, you're fine. There's no opportunity for Medicare to review it. You're almost, as long as you're acting reasonably, you're good. I think that the challenge is for the cases that do meet the review thresholds, if the claim is not reviewed by Medicare, what Medicare appears to be saying with Section 4.3 is that certain products or certain ways in which people are complying, quote unquote, with the obligation to consider Medicare's interest are essentially unsafe at any speed, right? They're designating two classes of cases as two classes of products as non-CMS approved products as a, quote, potential attempt to shift the burden. They're going to inherently believe that they are an attempt to shift the burden. So those cases that meet Medicare's review thresholds, that in Medicare's eyes avoid the review of Medicare, if they are doing so in such a way where, number one, you're avoiding the review process, but number two, you're effectively undercutting Medicare. I'm reading this to say if you're undercutting Medicare in an intentional way, then we're going to deny related claims. Of course, there have to be related claims, right? So the thing that people are doing, even if they're not having Medicare review it, is if they're having one of these products, generally speaking, there is money that's being set aside to pay for that person's medical treatment. And if that person's medical treatment is exhausted by one of these set-asides, that's where the issue is going to arise. So there are a lot of different caveats and different things that are sort of cut out of those different non-CMS approved products that I think Medicare is sort of trying to create a bright line, but I believe it's a little bit more of a wave where in some cases those non-CMS approved products look just like a regular Medicare set aside. They're just electing to not submit. In other cases, it really may be essentially quote low ball MSA. That's where the risk becomes a bigger issue. So on that continuum of risk is certainly something that you have to think of and evaluate. And I think it's really challenging for, an injured worker's lawyer who may not be, a Medicare set aside expert to know whether or not that's an appropriate or reasonable thing to do. You just have to remember that ultimately if your client, and they have not to date been denying medical care, but ultimately if your client does have their care denied at a later date, they're not without recourse. They do have an appeal process available to them to get coverage, but you never want to go through that.
Right. I'm sure. Hang on, Nancy. Oh, somebody has a hand up with a question. Nancy Bergen.